Hello. Today we will be talking about the Restoration, the Enlightenment, and Romanticism. Before we jump in, so the next two chapters are going to be kind of talking about styles of theater and kind of how they came about, because I think I've mentioned before, there's a lot of different ways to do theater and I guess I wouldn't call them genres, but like people, there's styles. And so a lot of people are like, this is how theater should be done, and so there is like very stylized pieces because people wrote papers and like convinced others that that's how we should do theater. We are starting off with the Restoration. The Restoration is a period in English history. The theater was heavily influenced by Charles II, who was exiled from England and spent his time in France until he returned. He brought the following qualities back with him to influence the theater: proscenium arches, which are those picture box theaters that we've talked about before, plush costumes, neoclassical rules, which we'll get into that momentarily, and upper class patrons. So, upper class patrons, maybe he's trying to make the theaters in England more high class because like everybody can go, and they had standing room in Shakespeare's theater, and like poor people could pay a penny. And like a lot of times you see in movies when people throw vegetables on stage, like that did happen like all through early theater, and actually like until like mid 1900s. Not very good theater etiquette for today. One thing that was mentioned that he brought back were neoclassical rules. And these are rules for how to write a play. Neoclassicism is a type of stylized theater, and there is this famous playwright named Moliere, and he was really big on it. And there's just a lot of rules, and so your plays all have to follow these. And we've never really talked about too much, but theater eventually wasn't separated from the government, so a lot of times there would be like a chancellor or somebody who would read your plays and be like, this is trash, or like, no, this isn't good, and they would censor art. So neoclassicism came about because of all of the rules that they already had in place. And here are some of the rules. There needed to be decorum in your plays, a term which meant that all dramatic characters should behave in ways based on their age, profession, sex, and rank. I don't know what that typo meant. Each character should follow this set behavior. And I guess this is saying that like if you are a 50-year-old woman, you should not be wearing a 20-year-old woman's outfit. So in those plays, you would never see that kind of stuff happening. Or if you're like a high-class woman who has like manners, you would never see her like, you know, like in Titanic when Rose comes down and she starts like drinking like a sailor and is like doing all that stuff. Not decorum. They would not like Rose in Titanic when she did that. There's verisimilitude, which all drama was to be true to life. Thus, because they were not observed in everyday life, such things as ghosts, apparitions, and supernatural events were forbidden. And so in Shakespeare's play, he loves using ghosts. In Hamlet, his dad dies and comes to Hamlet as a ghost and is like, hey, your uncle Claudius killed me. Go revenge me. So Shakespeare definitely used it, but in neoclassicism, you don't want to do that. And I should mention that neoclassicism is a French style. They had the unities, which means time, place, and action. So the time means that it had to be in 24 hours. So you couldn't have a play that spanned over a couple days, like Romeo and Juliet is 3 days. So there's none of that. Place means that it's in your living room. You cannot have so many set changes because we don't want to follow that. That's too much. So it's just in one area. And then action means that there can't be a lot of subplots. So if the story is about this person trying to take the money from this other person, there can't be like a romance subplot or like a whole bunch of other things. It just like needed to be about that one thing. I'm going to repeat myself. So it's restricted the action of the play to one locale. meaning like if it's in the living room, it's in the living room, required one central story involving a relatively small group of characters, no subplots. There needed to be purity of dramatic types. Comedy and tragedy should not be mixed. So either it's a drama or it's a funny play. It can't have both. And then purpose of the drama needed to be to teach a moral lesson and entertain at the same time. So there needs to be a moral of the story at the end. The most famous, again, playwright is Moliere, who did neoclassicism, and he wrote a play called Tartuffe, which is this picture. And it's about a guy who's trying to swindle this rich guy out of his money and kind of like take his place in his family, and how he's doing all that. This play actually had to be rewritten because of the policing done on the arts. Like they didn't like the what was going on, because the guy who was swindling the rich dude was a clergy. He wasn't a clergy member, but he was posing as like a priest, and so then the church thought that was against saying that religion is bad and that they might swindle you, even though I don't think that was what he was intending at all. And it wasn't until the play got written so many times that eventually he just like puts the current king at the end of the play, and who comes and saves the day. So it's like out of nowhere, it's just the king is there, and he's like, hey, which is kind of something in Greek dramas when they didn't know how to end it, and they'd be like, the god comes down, and he just saves the day. And the king loved that he was in the play, and so he's like, yeah, I am amazing, and I would save the day. No more rewrites. This is perfect. And so that's pretty funny. Also, a fun fact for you, Moliere was also an actor, so like in this day and age, like playwrights acted, they probably directed, and they did all of the things, right? People used to be like 7 things when you read like in history. Anyway, but he was acting on stage in one of his plays, and he actually died on stage, but he was supposed to die on stage when acting, and people were like, oh my god, that was just so real. That was the best death I've ever seen. But he was really dead on stage. So, fun facts for you. I will add a crash course on all of this. Back to the Restoration. The most popular type of theater in this period was the comedy of manners. These plays often featured great wit and wordplay and told stories about sexual gratification, bedroom escapades, and humankind's unrefined nature when it comes to sex. Women could legally appear on stage now, thank you Charles II, and women on stage were a novelty, and most audience members found them delightful, but some still considered them indecent to be on stage. Aphra Behn was the most famous female playwright of this era. Before being a playwright, she was a spy for the English government. That's a cool life. Her first big hit was The Forced Marriage. She wrote 20 plays in total. They were full of sexual intrigue, loveless marriages, and satire. Her best-known play was The Rover, or The Banished Cavalier, in 2 parts. She had to endure charges of plagiarism by critics who were shocked that a woman could write such a successful play. By the early 1700s, for Restoration audiences, which consisted primarily of upper class, going to the theater had more to do with socializing than seeing a performance. They even brought their own waitstaff to serve banquets during the performance and used their servants to exchange messages to other guests. The theater had become a place to conduct business and show off one's wealth and finery. And here's a little picture of what it kind of looked like, I guess. Many performances were given with as many as 100 patrons crowded onto the stage alongside them being the actors. Later, the artist prevailed in pushing the wealthy audience members off stage and into enclosed seating areas or boxes near the stage. I guess when you have money, you want to be a part of the action, but that would be super annoying. So then next we were moving on to the Age of Reason, which is the Enlightenment period. So the Enlightenment glorified humans' power to reason and analyze. It was a period of great philosophical, scientific, technological, and political revolutions. In fact, some scholars call the Renaissance the false Enlightenment. The seeds of the Enlightenment had been planted when the explorers brought back stories of distant and exotic lands and cultures. The public had an appetite for the tales of travel to Asia, Africa, and the New World. Social satire took the guise of travel books such as Persian Letters in 1721, recounting the experiences of two Persian noblemen who are traveling through France, and then Gulliver's Travels, 1726, which is actually a pretty famous story. During his first voyage, Gulliver is washed ashore after a shipwreck and finds himself a prisoner of a race of tiny people, less than 6 inches tall, who are inhabitants of the island country of Lilliput. During the Enlightenment, most universities were still controlled by organized religion and classic thoughts. Enlightenment philosophers and free thinkers throughout Europe had formed scholarly societies and intellectual salons where they could exchange ideas. In America, Benjamin Franklin founded the American Philosophical Society. Many of these societies attacked religious dogma and proclaimed that there was a new faith, a faith in reason. The emphasis on reason led to revolutions in math, physics, botany, chemistry, geology, and zoology. It was the Enlightenment that brought us dictionaries, scientific journals, compasses, factories, fountain pens, museums, fire extinguishers, and the flushing toilet. The microscope was improved, and the study of microorganisms began. Ben Franklin started playing with electricity and invented the lightning rod. Modern chemistry was developed. Edmund Halley claimed that comets recorded in 1456, 1531, and 1607 were actually the same one and predicted that it would return in 1758. He was right. And this is, of course, Halley's comet. The revolutions in philosophy, astronomy, science, and religion had a profound effect on theater. The revolution in philosophy changed how playwrights viewed characters. In the past, characters were evil simply because he was evil or he was controlled by the devil, but now playwrights began to look at a character's motivation, circumstances, and upbringing using an early form of what we call psychology. The revolution in astronomy caused people to question religion and led to political plays that disputed the church's power and the divine rights of kings. But the most profound revolution was the sciences, which caused a dramatic leap in technology and industry. This resulted in the Industrial Revolution, greater productivity, greater wealth, and a strong middle class composed of small business owners and manufacturers who wanted their own theaters. As the middle class gained power, theaters began to turn to them for patronage, and playwrights began to write plays with middle class heroes. The new type of middle class plays came to be known as domestic tragedies and sentimental comedies. Unlike the tragic plays of ancient Greece, whose heroes were noble birth, domestic tragedies told stories about common people who felt grand emotions and suffered devastating consequences. Sentimental comedies showed middle-class characters finding happiness and true love. So because of realism, though, which, like, you're seeing stuff on stage, a lot of people were like, this is bullshit. I don't want to, like, look at real life on stage. Where's the magic and where's the fun? And so because another theater style started called Romanticism, which we're going to talk about in one sec, because it was a response to people hating how people were doing theater before them, or at the same time, but they didn't agree with that style. So Romanticism. The Enlightenment philosophers and scientists changed human thought forever. Before the Enlightenment, the secrets of the cosmos were explainable only by miracle and theology. But cold reason and hard logic seldom make for good theater. Theater is about emotions. Some poets, novelists, and playwrights began to question the scientific revolution's obsession with logic. These writers, known as Romantics, felt that science was not adequate to describe the full range of human experience, and their writing stressed instinct, intuition, and feeling. They wanted to go beyond reason to transcend the realm of emotions where experience cannot be rationally explained. In short, the Romantic Age was a celebration of love, emotion, and chivalry. Romantic plays were overflowing with uncompromising optimism that celebrated uncorrupted, nostalgic, deeply earnest, self-assured, rosy-cheeked heroes who revolted against authority because in their hearts they were right. It is from this age that we get the idea of artists being obsessive, moody, and lovesick. At this time, all the plays were supposed to have 5 acts, but Romantics said that plays should be as long and contain as many acts as needed to tell the story, or as long as the writer's passion holds out. As a result, Romantic plays tended to be very long. When produced today, the director often needs to make substantial edits to keep the production from going past midnight. Usually shows start at 8 o'clock, so that would be a 4-hour show, but sometimes shows start at like 7:30, so you're looking at a good 5-hour show. The Romantics also transformed stage design, calling for more realistic sets. They wanted to imitate nature. Painted flats were abandoned, and new sets were designed to incorporate picturesque forests, mountains, and gardens. 2 examples of Romantic plays for you. First up, we have Cyrano de Bergerac. Cyrano is a cadet, a nobleman serving as a soldier in the French army. He is a brash, strong-willed man of many talents. In addition to being a remarkable duelist, he is a gifted, joyful poet and is also a musician. However, he has an extremely large nose, which causes him to doubt himself. This doubt prevents him from expressing his love for a distant cousin. At this time, it was okay. Cousins are fine. The beautiful and intellectual Roxanne, as he believes that his ugliness would prevent him the dream of being loved by even an ugly woman. And just so you know, Peter Dinklage, who plays Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones, I don't know how many people watch Game of Thrones, but he did this on Broadway, and he was Cyrano, and so he was, yeah. And my roommate saw it and said it was amazing, and I'm really jealous. And then Steve Martin did a version of this movie, because Steve Martin, I don't know if you know, like, we know him from comedies and things, but he started as like a stand-up career, and like he started as a magician, but he writes plays as well, and he composes music for plays, and like he's in the theater world too. But he created a movie in the 80s called Roxanne, which is kind of a modern version of Cyrano de Bergerac. And then 2 more examples we have are Les Mis and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Right now we're going to talk about a playwright. His name was Goethe. In Germany, the Romantic movement was called Sturm und Drang. These plays exalted nature, emotions, and individualism. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was the greatest of the Sturm und Drang playwrights. He was not only a playwright, but also a critic, a journalist, a painter, a biologist, a statesman, a poet, a novelist, a philosopher, a scientist, and a manager of a playhouse. See, this is what I'm saying, when back in the day people had like a huge laundry list of who they were. It's so funny to always read. He filled more than 100 volumes with his novels, plays, and letters. His writing is credited with the power to touch its readers deeply. In his novel, The Sorrows of Young Werther, the lovelorn protagonist kills himself. Not long after it was published, a string of lovesick young men and women took their own lives. In their pockets were found copies of Goethe's romantic novel. I should put that on a list to read. That seems intense if people are taking their lives. So from Romanticism stemmed melodrama. And so Romanticism was only a flash in the history of theater. Soon, cheap imitations of romantic plays were stealing the stage, imitations that lacked the soul of the romantic writers but exploited their excesses. These new plays, called melodramas, and were made popular by traveling actors who were crossing the United States and Europe with the help of a newly invented locomotive. The word melodrama is a blend of melody and drama and refers to the background music often played during these performances. I will add a clip. These plays were accompanied by an orchestra. Like romantic plays, melodramas are often about, that's a typo, a working class protagonist who sets out on a great adventure, but melodramas writers mix in sensational subjects, stock characters, virtuous heroes, dastardly villains, and striking spectacles such as earthquakes, battles, and floods. The plots were formulaic, filled with unbelievable coincidences, disguises, mistaken identities, and oversimplified moral dilemmas. Unlike romantic plays, melodramas seldom question the authority, and they usually lack depth. And then examples of melodramas, I guess you could say, are soap operas. Soap operas are modern melodramas, and sometimes like even sitcoms can be like hilariously like melodramatic, and sometimes I'm gonna get backlash for this, but sometimes I think Supernatural can be a melodrama because it's always like very high. I mean, there's not music underscoring it, but please don't hate me for saying the Supernatural comment. It's also one of my favorite shows. But yeah, just we'll stick with modern soap operas. One of the most prolific writers of melodrama was Frenchman Eugene Scribe. He wrote nearly 400 plays with the help of assistants. Scribe was the king of the formula writers and turned out play after play with the same simple structure. The sympathetic protagonist suffers at the hands of an evil antagonist in the course of an intense action, suspense, and contrived plot devices. The ending is always happy, and loose ends are neatly tied up. All the neatness earned his melodramas the sarcastic label of the well-made play. Yeah. Today, Scribe is considered one of the worst playwrights. Melodrama is still present today in soap operas and in popular movies like Star Wars and The Fast and the Furious. That was the book's word, so don't get mad if you love those things too. But again, they could be a little dramatic.